In the early morning hours of December 26, 1996, John and Patsy Ramsey awoke to find their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet Ramsey, missing from her bed at their home in Boulder, Colorado. Patsy and John had woken up early to prepare for a trip when Patsy discovered a ransom note on the stairs demanding $118,000 for their daughter's safe return. Despite the note's warning not to involve police, Patsy immediately called them, as well as friends and family, in order to aid in the search for JonBenet Ramsey. Police arrived at 5:55 a.m. and found no signs of forced entry, but did not search the basement, where her body would eventually be found. Before JonBenet's body was even found, there were many investigative mistakes made. Only JonBenet's room was cordoned off, so friends and family roamed the rest of the house, picking up things and potentially destroying evidence. The Boulder Police Department also shared evidence they found with the Ramseys and delayed conducting their informal interviews with the parents. At 1 p.m., the detectives instructed Mr. Ramsey and a family friend to go around the house to see if anything was amiss. The first place they looked was the basement, where they found JonBenet's body. John Ramsey immediately picked up his daughter's body and brought her upstairs, which unfortunately destroyed potential evidence by disturbing the crime scene. During the autopsy, it was discovered that JonBenet Ramsey had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation, in addition to a skull fracture. Her mouth had been covered in duct tape, and her wrists and neck were wrapped with a white cord. Her torso had been covered in a white blanket. There was no conclusive evidence of rape, as no semen was found on the body, and her vagina appeared to have been wiped clean, although a sexual assault had occurred. The makeshift garrote was made using a length of cord and part of a paintbrush from the basement. The coroner also found what was believed to be a pineapple in JonBenet's stomach. Her parents do not remember giving her any the night before she died, but there was a bowl of pineapple in the kitchen which had her 9-year-old brother Burke's fingerprints on it. However, this meant little since time cannot be attributed to fingerprints. The Ramseys maintained Burke was in his room all night asleep, and there was never any physical evidence to reflect otherwise. There are two popular theories in the Ramsey case, the family theory and the intruder theory. The initial investigation focused heavily on the Ramsey family for many reasons. The police felt that the ransom note was staged, as it was unusually long, written using a pen and paper from the Ramsey house, and demanded almost the exact amount of money that John had received as a bonus earlier that year. Additionally, the Ramseys were reluctant to cooperate with police, though they later said this was because they feared the police would not conduct a full investigation and targeted them as easy suspects. However, all three members of the immediate family were questioned by investigators and submitting handwriting samples to compare to the ransom letter. Both John and Burke were cleared of any suspicion of writing the note, although much was made that Patsy could not be conclusively cleared by her handwriting sample. This analysis was not further supported by any other evidence. Despite a larger pool of suspects, the media immediately focused on JonBenet's parents, and they spent years under the harsh limelight of the public eye. In 1999, a Colorado grand jury voted to indict the Ramseys on child endangerment and obstruction of a murder investigation. However, the prosecutor felt that the evidence did not meet the beyond a reasonable doubt standard and declined to prosecute. JonBenet's parents were never officially named as suspects in the murder. Alternatively, the intruder theory had lots of physical evidence to support it. There was a boot print found next to JonBenet's body, which did not belong to anyone in the family. There was also a broken window in the basement, which was believed to be the most likely point of entry for an intruder. Additionally, there was DNA from drops of blood from an unknown male found on her underwear. The floors in the Ramseys' home were heavily carpeted, making it plausible for an intruder to have carried JonBenet downstairs without waking the family. One of the most famous suspects was John Carr. He was arrested in 2006 when he confessed to killing JonBenet by accident after he had drugged and essayed her. Carr was eventually dismissed as a suspect after it was revealed that no drugs had been found in JonBenet's system, police could not confirm he was in Boulder at the time, and his DNA did not match the profile generated from the samples found. Much of the recent investigation into the case revolves around the DNA profiles developed from the sample found in her underwear and the touch DNA later developed from her long johns. The profile from her underwear was entered into CODIS in 2003, but no matches have been identified. In 2006, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey took over the case. She agreed with the federal prosecutor that the intruder theory was more plausible than the Ramseys killing their daughter. Under Lacey's lead, investigators developed a DNA profile from touch DNA on her long johns. In 2008, Lacey released a statement detailing the DNA evidence and fully exonerating the family, saying in part, "The Boulder District Attorney's Office does not consider any member of the Ramsey family, including John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey, as suspects in this case. We make this announcement now because we have recently obtained this new scientific evidence that adds significantly to the exculpatory value of the previous scientific evidence. We do so with full appreciation for the other evidence in this case." Local, national, and even international publicity has focused on the murder of John Benet Ramsey. Many members of the public came to believe that one or more of the Ramseys, including her mother or father or even her brother, were responsible for this brutal homicide. Those suspicions were not based on evidence that had been tested in court. Rather, they were based on evidence reported by the media. In 2010, the case was officially reopened with renewed focus on the DNA samples. Further testing has been conducted on the samples, and experts now believe that the sample is actually from two individuals rather than one. In 2016, it was announced that the DNA would be sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations to be tested using more modern methods, and authorities hope to develop an even stronger DNA profile of the killer. In 2016, CBS aired the case of John Benet Ramsey, which implied her then 9-year-old brother Burke was the killer, despite the fact that he was cleared by the DNA evidence that proved the existence of an intruder. Burke filed a $750 million lawsuit against CBS for defamation. The case was settled in 2019, and while the terms of the settlement were not disclosed, his lawyer stated the case was amicably resolved to the satisfaction of all parties. The John Benet Ramsey case is still open and remains unsolved. The 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia, is one of the oldest cold cases in Los Angeles. Not only was it a horrific crime, but it's also proven notoriously difficult to solve. In the decades since the Black Dahlia murder, police, the press, and amateur sleuths alike have all delved deep into this unsolved crime and developed several convincing theories. Though we may never know who killed the Black Dahlia, poring over the evidence of this case is just as darkly fascinating today as it was in 1947. On January 15, 1947, Elizabeth Short's dead body was found in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Leimert Park. The first person who reported the grisly sight was a mother out for a morning walk with her child. According to the woman, the way Short's body had been posed made her think that the corpse was a mannequin at first, but a closer look revealed the true horror of the Black Dahlia crime scene. The 22-year-old Short had been sliced in two at the waist and completely drained of blood. Some of her organs, such as her intestines, had been removed and neatly placed underneath her buttocks. Pieces of flesh had been cut away from her thighs and breasts, and her stomach was full of feces, leading some to believe that she'd been forced to eat them before she was killed. The most chilling mutilations, however, were the lacerations on her face. The killer had sliced each side of her face from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating what's known as a Glasgow smile. Since the body had already been washed clean, Los Angeles Police Department detectives concluded that she must have been killed elsewhere before being dumped in Leimert Park. Near her body, detectives noted a heel print and a cement sack with traces of blood that had presumably been used to transport her body to the vacant lot. The LAPD reached out to the FBI to help identify the body by searching their fingerprint database. Short's fingerprints turned up rather quickly because she had applied for a job as a clerk at the commissary of the U.S. Army's Camp Cook in California back in 1943. And then her prints turned up a second time since she had been arrested by the Santa Barbara Police Department for underage drinking, just 7 months after she'd applied to the job. The FBI also had her mugshot from her arrest, which they provided to the press. Before long, the media began reporting every salacious detail they could find about Short. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Short's mother, Phoebe Short, didn't learn of her daughter's death until reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner telephoned her, pretending that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. They pumped her for all the details they could get on Elizabeth before revealing the terrible truth. Her daughter had been murdered, and her corpse had been dismembered in unspeakable ways. As the media learned more about Elizabeth Short's history, they began to brand her as a sexual deviant. One police report read, "This victim knew at least 50 men at the time of her death, and at least 25 men had been seen with her in the 60 days preceding her death. She was known as a teaser of men." They gave Short the nickname the Black Dahlia. due to her reported preference for wearing a lot of sheer black clothing. This was a reference to the movie The Blue Dahlia, which was out at the time. Some people spread the false rumor that Short was a prostitute, while others basically claimed that she liked to tease men because she was a lesbian. Adding to her mystique, Short was reportedly a Hollywood hopeful. She had moved to Los Angeles just 6 months before her death and worked as a waitress. Sadly, she had no known acting jobs, and her death became her one claim to fame. But as famous as the case was, authorities had tremendous difficulty figuring out who was behind it. However, members of the media did receive a few clues. On January 21st, about a week after the body was found, the Examiner received a call from a person claiming to be the murderer, who said he would be sending Short's belongings in the mail as proof of his claim. Shortly thereafter, on the 24th, the Examiner received a package with Short's birth certificate, photos, business cards, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Also included was a letter pasted together from newspaper and magazine letter clippings that read, "Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." All of these items had been wiped down with gasoline, leaving no fingerprints behind. Though a partial fingerprint was found on the envelope, it was damaged in transport and never analyzed. On January 26th, another letter arrived. This handwritten note read, "Here it is. Turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter included a location. Police waited at the appointed time and place, but the author never showed. Afterward, the alleged killer sent a note made of letters cut and pasted from magazines to the Examiner that said, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." Yet again, everything sent by the person had been wiped clean with gasoline, so investigators couldn't lift any prints from the evidence. At one point, the LAPD had 750 investigators on the case and interviewed more than 150 potential suspects linked to the Black Dahlia killing. Officers heard more than 60 confessions during the initial investigation, but none of them were considered legitimate. Since then, there have been more than 500 confessions, none of which led to anyone being charged. As time went on and the case went cold, many people assumed that the Black Dahlia murder was a date gone wrong, or that Short had run into a sinister stranger late at night while walking alone. After over 70 years, the Black Dahlia murder case remains open. But in recent years, a couple of intriguing and chilling theories have emerged. Shortly after his father's death in 1999, now retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel was going through his dad's belongings when he noticed two photos of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short. After discovering these haunting images, Hodel began using the skills he had gained as a policeman to investigate his own deceased father. Hodel went through newspaper archives and witness interviews from the case, and even filed a Freedom of Information Act to obtain FBI files on the Black Dahlia murder. He also had a handwriting expert compare samples of his father's writing to the writing on some of the notes sent to the press from the alleged killer. The analysis found a strong possibility that his father's handwriting matched, but the results were not conclusive. On the grislier side, the Black Dahlia crime scene photos showed that Short's body had been cut in a manner consistent with hemiocorporectomy, a medical procedure that slices the body beneath the lumbar spine. Hodel's father had been a doctor, who attended medical school when this procedure was being taught in the 1930s. Additionally, Hodel searched his father's archives at UCLA, finding a folder full of receipts for contracting work on his childhood home. In that folder, there was a receipt dated a few days before the murder for a large bag of concrete, the same size and brand as a concrete bag found near Elizabeth Short's body. By the time Hodel began his investigation, many of the police officers who originally worked on the case were already dead. However, he carefully reconstructed conversations these officers had about the case. Eventually, Hodel compiled all of his evidence into a 2003 bestseller called Black Dahlia Avenger, The True Story. While fact-checking the book, Los Angeles Times columnist Steve Lopez requested official police files from the case and made an important discovery. Shortly after the murder, the LAPD had 6 main suspects, and George Hodel was on their list. In fact, he was such a serious suspect that his home was bugged in 1950 so the police could monitor his activities. Much of the audio was innocuous, but one chilling exchange struck out. 8:25 p.m. Woman screamed. Woman screamed again. It should be noted, the woman not heard before the scream. Later that day, George Hodel was overheard telling someone, "Realize there was nothing I could do. Put a pillow over her head and cover her with a blanket. Get a taxi." Expired 12:59. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. He continued, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Even after this shocking revelation, which seems to support that George Hodel killed Short, and possibly also his secretary, the Black Dahlia case still hasn't been officially closed. However, this hasn't stopped Steve Hodel from investigating his father. He says he has found details from dozens of other murders that could possibly be connected to his father, implicating him not only as the Black Dahlia murderer, but also as a deranged serial killer. Hodel's research has even garnered some attention from law enforcement. In 2004, Stephen R. Kay, the head deputy for LA County's District Attorney's Office, said that if George Hodel was still alive, he would have enough to indict him for the Elizabeth Short murder. In 2017, British author Pugh Eatwell announced that she had finally solved the decades-old case and published her findings in a book called Black Dahlia, Red Rose, The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. The real culprit, she claimed, was Leslie Dillon, a man who police briefly considered the primary suspect but ultimately let go. However, she also claimed there was much more to the case besides the killer themselves. According to Eatwell, Dillon, who worked as a bellhop, murdered Short at the behest of Mark Hansen, a local nightclub and movie theater owner who worked with Dillon. Hansen was another suspect that had eventually been let go, and the owner of the address book that had been mailed to the Examiner. He later claimed that he gave the address book to Short as a gift. Short had reportedly stayed with Hansen a few nights, and he was one of the last people reported to have spoken with her before her death in a phone call on January 8th. Eatwell alleges that Hansen was infatuated with Short and came on to her, although she rebuffed his advances. Then he supposedly called on Leslie Dillon to take care of her. Hansen, it seemed, knew Dillon was capable of murder, but didn't realize just how deranged he really was. Previously, Leslie Dillon had worked as a mortician's assistant, where he could have potentially learned how to bleed a body dry. Eatwell also discovered, from police records, that Dillon knew details about the crime that had not yet been released to the public. One detail was that Short had a tattoo of a rose on her thigh, which had been cut out and shoved inside her vagina. For his part, Dillon claimed to be an aspiring crime writer and told authorities that he was writing a book about the Dahlia case, which never materialized. Despite all the evidence pointing to him, Dillon was never charged with the crime. Eatwell claims he was released due to Mark Hansen's ties to some of the cops at the LAPD. While Eatwell believes the department was corrupt to begin with, she also thinks that Hansen contributed largely to its corruption by exploiting his ties to certain officers. Another discovery that lent itself to Eatwell's theory was a crime scene found at a local motel. During her research, Eatwell came across a report by Astor Motel owner Henry Hoffman. The Astor Motel was a small, 10-cabin facility near the University of Southern California. On the morning of January 15, 1947, he opened the door to one of his cabins and found the room covered in blood and fecal matter. In another cabin, he discovered that someone had left a bundle of women's clothing wrapped up in brown paper, which was also stained with blood. Instead of reporting the crime, Hoffman simply cleaned it up. He had been arrested 4 days earlier for beating his wife and didn't want to risk another run-in with the police. Eatwell believes that the motel is where Elizabeth Short was murdered. Eyewitness reports, though uncorroborated, claim that a woman who resembled Short was seen at the motel shortly before the murder. Eatwell's theory have not been proven, as everyone involved with the original Black Dahlia murder case is most likely dead by now, and many official LAPD documents remain locked away in vaults. However, Eatwell remains confident in her findings and truly believes that she's solved the mysterious and gruesome case of the Black Dahlia murder. Though we still don't know for certain who killed the Black Dahlia, these recent theories present compelling cases, and it's possible that the truth is still out there, just waiting for the right investigation to finally bring it to light. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The infamous Lizzie Borden house is said to be one of New England's most haunted homes after a brutal axe murder happened inside. After the murders, there are tales that ghosts are still haunting it. Step back in time to the home of America's most notorious unsolved crimes, the Lizzie Borden house on 2nd Street in Fall River. Experience its creepy atmosphere and listen to its spine-tingling tales as you explore this legendary haunted house full of secrets and the occasional supernatural surprise. Grab a candle, journey upstairs, and learn the history of the infamous New England home. Find out how, in 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were discovered brutally murdered in this very house, passing down stories for generations to come. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born in 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts, and was given the name Andrew as well because her father so wanted a son. She grew up in an affluent family in what would later be known as the Lizzie Borden house. Although a rich family, her father was well known for being frugal, and they had a complicated relationship to say the least. She grew up with her sister Emma Lenora Borden and was involved in church activities such as Sunday school, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, as well as the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission. 2 years after her mother died, her father remarried. They didn't get along, and Lizzie believed she had married her father for his wealth. Their live-in maid, Sullivan, claimed that both Emma and Lizzie rarely ate meals together with their father and stepmother. Before the murders, tensions grew in the family inside the Lizzie Borden house. Her father kept gifting real estate to her stepmother's family. Days before the murders, the whole family was violently ill, and her stepmother feared poison as her husband was not really a popular man. Her father had also killed pigeons in the barn with hatchets that Lizzie was upset about. She had built a roost for them, and after a family argument, she was even sent away to New Bedford and didn't return until a week before the murders. On August 4th, 1892, her stepmother and father were found murdered by an axe in their home in broad daylight. When they questioned Lizzie Borden, she made answers that were both strange and contradictory. The police investigation was later criticized for their lack of diligence, as they did not even check her for bloodstains, only search her room superficially, and let them stay in the house the following night after the murder. They also had a hatchet they thought could be the murder weapon, but never bothered to take fingerprints, even though it was a method the police had started with elsewhere. Lizzie Borden was arrested and put on trial that received a lot of media coverage nationwide. During the trial, there was also another axe murder that looked so similar to the Borden house, and many started to take Lizzie Borden's side and claim her innocence. In the end, Lizzie Borden was acquitted on all charges and let off after many had come to her defense, including her maid, her sister, and neighbors, all testified that she could never have done it. After she was acquitted from the trial of the murders, she moved into a house with her sister, and they stayed in Fall River. When coming out from the courthouse, she said she was the happiest woman in the world. But for the remainder of her days, she was an outcast in the Fall River society. Even if she, by trial, was found innocent, the fact that they never found the killer and the strange rumors about her continued and fueled the idea that she might have done it after all. Even her maid, Sullivan, confessed on her deathbed, allegedly, that she had lied on the stand to protect Lizzie Borden. No one was ever arrested for the murders, but Lizzie Borden's guilt and motive has ever since been debated without any answers being found. After the gruesome murders in the Lizzie Borden house, the house itself has drawn attention to itself by being a haunted house, where a lot of paranormal activity is going on. The house is preserved as it was and is hosting tours to continue to speculate what really happened that fateful and hot August day. It is said that the ghost of Lizzie Borden's father and stepmother, Abby and Andrew, is haunting the Lizzie Borden house, still trying to get the truth about their murder out. One longtime guide, though, has another explanation for the strange sounds many attribute to ghosts. After they put air conditioning in the house, the sound travels in a strange manner as the Lizzie Borden house is filled with holes and cracks. Another haunting that is said to be going on is the death next door of a mother that murdered her children. A woman named Eliza Darling Borden had 3 children. She murdered 2 of them before taking her own life in 1848. One of the theories is that she killed herself in the house that would eventually become Andrew Borden's in 1872. Even Lizzie herself is rumored to haunt the place. It is not only in the Lizzie Borden house she is said to haunt, though, as she is also said to haunt the place known as Maplecroft, the home she lived in on French Street after the trial. For what is she haunting the place for, though? Is it because of the grief and trauma after the horrible murders that happened? Or is it perhaps guilt, as she herself really was the killer? On December 5th, 1872, while sailing through rough weather, the Canadian brig Di Gracia sighted a seemingly abandoned ship drifting through the Atlantic between Portugal and the Azores Islands. It was the Mary Celeste, an American brigantine that had left New York nearly a month prior. When the crew of the Di Gracia boarded the Mary Celeste, they found everything in perfect order. The crew's clothes were neatly packed away, yet there was not a living soul to be found aboard the ship. The only possible clues that could explain the crew's whereabouts were a disassembled pump in the hold and a missing lifeboat. And so began one of the most enduring mysteries of the sea. On November 7th, 1872, a merchant ship with a cargo of denatured alcohol left New York Harbor for Genoa, Italy. The Mary Celeste sailed forth, helmed by Captain Benjamin Briggs and his hand-picked crew of 7 men. Accompanying the sailors were Briggs' wife and 2-year-old daughter. The ship and its crew spent 2 weeks at sea fighting against raging storms and treacherous seas before reaching the Azores. Captain Briggs chronicled the rough journey in his journal, but curiously, his log ended abruptly on November 25, 1872, at 5 a.m. The night prior, his log recalled the ship and its crew had continued to face rough seas and winds of more than 35 knots, but by the morning they had come out on the other side unscathed with the island of Santa Maria in sight. All it seemed was well. But when the crew of the Di Gracia came across the Mary Celeste just over 1 week later, on December 5th, they found it abandoned, drifting in the seas 400 miles east of the Azores. Captain David Morehouse sent a boarding party to investigate the Mary Celeste and found the ship in near perfect condition. Aside from a few feet of water in the ship's bilge, the lowest point of the ship which rests beneath the waterline, things seemed to be mostly in order. A few charts had been tossed about below deck, but the crew's belongings were neatly tucked away, and the ship was stocked with enough food and water to last 6 months. The only thing missing was its crew. It made no sense that Briggs, an experienced seaman, would abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship. In fact, Daily Nautica reports Morehouse had dined with Briggs in New York just before each of the men and their respective crews set sail, and he considered the man to be a friend. He knew just how capable of a captain Briggs was. Morehouse and his crew towed the merchant ship with them to Gibraltar, where authorities conducted an investigation that ultimately yielded no conclusive results. At this point, several theories began to surface. English Inspector Frederick Flood was the first to hypothesize about the disappearance of the crew. With the knowledge that Morehouse and Briggs were friends, the inspector suspected that the two captains may have concocted a scheme to defraud the insurance company and split the profit earned from the eventual sale of the Mary Celeste. Per the laws of the sea, the abandoned ship did now belong to Morehouse, after all. The inspector then theorized that Briggs had killed his crew and hidden himself away in the cargo hold of the Di Gracia. Flood's theory, however, was full of holes. Briggs had in fact held property shares in the ship, so he would have gained nothing from the scheme. The theory also failed to account for Briggs's wife and daughter. The crew of the Di Gracia eventually received payment. However, it was only 1/6 of the total $46,000 value of the Mary Celeste. Apparently, the authorities weren't totally convinced of their innocence. Additional theories suggested that the crew had gotten drunk off the ship's alcohol cargo and mutinied, but there was no signs of violence. Others said the ship must have been raided by pirates, yet no valuables were missing. The mystery may very well have been left alone had author Arthur Conan Doyle not written the 1884 short story J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, a fictitious account of an ex-slave who captures a ship called the Marie Celeste. The story reignited interest in the ship, but as a theory, the story is entirely baseless. Naturally, stories of sea monsters became associated with the missing crew, as did explanations of waterspouts and, much later, extraterrestrial abduction. Yet for all of these theories, none of the evidence ever matched. Perhaps the most plausible theory was that vapors from the alcohol had blown the hatch cover off. Then, fearing fire, the crew abandoned the ship. However, the hatch cover was securely fastened, once again leaving no feasible explanation. In 2002, documentarian Anna McGregor sought to investigate the story of the now infamous ghost ship. There are obvious limitations for historic cases, she said, but using the latest technology, you can come to a different conclusion. Per Smithsonian Magazine, McGregor enlisted the help of a physical oceanographer at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, named Phil Richardson, and together they reconstructed the drift of the ghost ship and deduced that Briggs's chronometer, which helps determine a vessel's position at sea, had been faulty. The Mary Celeste was hopelessly off course, 120 miles west of where it should have been. The captain thus expected to spot land 3 days earlier than he did. McGregor also analyzed Flood's note from the time to determine that all had indeed been going as planned with the course of the Mary Celeste, until about 5 days before Briggs's final log. Significantly, Briggs's logs and Flood's notes showed that the ship had changed course the day before it reached the Azores. Briggs was now sailing directly north toward Santa Maria Island. It's possible the crew was seeking haven from the foul weather. But even all of this wouldn't make a captain abandon ship. However, McGregor also discovered that the ship had carried a load of coal on a previous voyage. Coal dust and debris from a recent refitting had potentially clogged the ship's pumps, meaning any water that made it onto the ship's lower decks didn't have a way back out. It's possible that Briggs then decided that, with the ship off course, the crew's best bet was to cut their losses and simply try to save themselves by abandoning ship and heading for the nearest piece of land. In this case, it was Santa Maria Island. Their lifeboat may have then tipped over, causing all 10 of them to drown. McGregor's theory is by no means universally accepted or even provable, but it at least lines up with the evidence, the disassembled pump, for example, in a way that other theories do not. Finally, some 130 years after the crew eerily vanished, the mystery of the Mary Celeste may finally have an answer. In 1946, Texarkana was plagued by a phantom killer who donned a white mask and hunted town residents under cover of nightfall. These infamous killings became known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. A famous movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, was based on this phantom killer and inspired the following cult classic movies such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. These movies pale in comparison to the Texarkana Moonlight Murders that have remained unsolved to this day for many years. Authorities believe that the Phantom Killer murdered a total of 5 people within the span of 2 weeks, with 3 victims surviving the attacks. These survivors described him as wearing a white mask or sack with holes cut for eyes, giving him his nickname as a Phantom. The first attempted victims were Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jeanne Larry, a young couple parked on the side of the road just outside of town on the night of February 22, 1946. According to reports, the Phantom held the couple at gunpoint outside their vehicle, ordering Hollis to remove his pants. Hollis was severely beaten but survived with several severe injuries, including a fractured skull. Mary Larry was ordered to run away with the Phantom chasing close in behind her. Upon reaching a ditch, she was ordered to change course to the road, where he caught up and sexually assaulted her with the pistol he carried before letting her run away again. Unlike the first couple, Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore did not survive the attack. Their bodies were found in March in their parked car, both having been shot in the back of the head. At the time of their death, Griffin was 29 years old, a veteran who made his living in carpentry and painting. Moore was only 17 years old and living with her cousin. Only a few weeks after they were joined by another couple, Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker. The last time the couple was seen together was when Martin went to pick Booker up from band practice. Martin's body was found 5 hours later, shot in the back of the head, and Booker's body was found 6 hours after Martin and 2 miles away, having been shot in the face and chest. Booker was the Phantom's youngest victim at 15 years of age. Bullet casing from both cases were a match, and fingerprints not matching any of the victims had been found, but proved inconclusive. The Phantom's killer's last official victims were a husband and wife in their farmhouse northeast of town. Virgil Stark was found with 2 shots to the back of the head, but his wife, Katie, survived being shot twice in the face. 1 bullet passed through her nose, and the second broke her jaw, lodging in under her tongue. She survived and ran down the street to a neighbor's house to get help. Texarkana all but shut down the city in wake of the murders, and nearly 400 people were arrested in connection with the killings. The killer's targeting of couples and lack of other identifiable motives led many at the time to believe that the killer was some sort of sex maniac. A handful of those suspects had more evidence against them than the rest, such as U.L. Sweeney. His wife confessed to as much at the time, but legally she could not testify against him. Peggy Ewell was interviewed several times, and despite the accuracy of her statements about the murders, law enforcement doubted she was telling the truth because she never could provide physical locations or correct time frames. Reports suggest she got her information from the news and publicly made reports. Swinney died in prison as a habitual offender in 1994 without ever implicating himself as the Phantom. A few years later, 21-year-old Virginia Carpenter went missing in 1948, and it was thought it had been the work of the Phantom Killer. However, Swinney was still in prison at the time. In 1999 and 2000, an anonymous woman contacted surviving family members of the Phantom's victims to apologize for what her father had done, but Ewell Swinney never had a daughter. The true killer's identity remains a mystery to this day, and Texarkana has never been the same since. Although this person likely is no longer alive, their grisly legacy has lived on as one of Texas's most brutal serial killers. Thank you for making it all the way through the video. If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button and comment down below. And until next time.